just a little bit more into what we have for the spaces, we'll actually go ahead and switch the workspaces, and you'll see how the layout's going to change with it. And then we're going to get in just kind of working a little bit more with how do we go through and begin to modify these shapes with some of the basic tools that we have available to us. So up till now, when we first open up something, you're going to see it comes up here in the layout workspace. With that, that's where all these panels, so the panels that you see on here, this is all part of that layout workspace. We're going to go ahead and click over on the modeling workspace. And with that, what you're going to find is it automatically gives us all of our modifiers over here, and then we see our different tools down the left-hand side here that we're going to go in and use to begin to manipulate what we have for our objects. So across the top, you're going to see up here then our different views that we can work with, selections, what are we adding. We go through and we start looking at the mesh, what are we trying to do with the mesh, dealing with the vertex, individual vertex or multiple vertices, dealing with edges, dealing with faces, depending on what it is that you've worked in. Some people, when we start to think about faces, you're probably going to think about more along the lines of polygon. So if you're in something that's doing a polygon count, that's what we're going to have when we start to look at faces, and then UV, and we go in to start to do UV wraps on objects. In the upper left, what you're going to have here is our edit mode, and we also have object mode. So the difference with that, if we're in object mode, you'll see what we have available here for tools with it. Also, as we go through and we start to add additional meshes into our designs, if we go through and we add it in object mode, it will become its own object up here inside of our collection. So we'll get another object here. If we are in edit mode and we go in and we add, it's going to go ahead and it's going to add it to whatever is our current mesh that's selected. So right now you'd see the cube selected up here. If I go in and I add another mesh to this, it's going to be added to that individual mesh. Now, can we go in later on and divide it out? Yes, we can. And we'll even look at how we can take an object itself and divide out elements with it as well. So just make sure that you're looking at it. The easy way, of course, is to look at the upper left. It says edit mode, or if it says object mode. What you will also start to see is there are different objects across the top that you can select, and you'll notice a much different toolbar depending on which mode you happen to be in. Any questions with that? So we're going to jump over into our modeling tab. So it's a modeling workspace. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to get in here to edit mode, which is going to allow us to see all of our various tools down the left-hand side. So we have our select box. We also then have our cursor. This allows us to go in and place that 3D cursor. Remember with that 3D cursor, and we go ahead and have that in the location, we add in our mesh. It's going to show up wherever that is at. Come down here, this is our move. So what we have selected, we can go ahead and we can move that. See, the shortcut for that is G. The easy way to kind of remember that is if we have a hold of something or if we have something selected, we want to move it, it's just G for grab. So we're going to grab that and allow us to what they also call translate it. So we can make that point go somewhere else. Our rotate, scale, and transform. Remember, the transform is going to allow us to do a lot of different things with it. So we start to look at what do we have. Right now I have a single vertex selected. We have our whole object selected, and this allows us to go in here and adjust that. Annotate, so we can write on it. We can take measurements. We can add cube. So with that, what are we going in here and starting to work with? So we look at it from an interactive setting. Where exactly we're going to go in and place that. Extruder region, so when we have something selected, we can extrude it. Inset faces, so we'll go and we'll start to work a little bit with this. It allows us to take a surface, click on it, and as we move it, it adjusts it and automatically gives us all of our connecting edges along with additional face and vertices to go with it. Bevel something, we can loop cut. You may also hear this called loop cut and slide, because that's what it does. You can create a loop You can also then slide it to where you want it, and then once you place it there, it in essence then cuts it and gives us additional things to grab a hold of. Knife to cut through, poly building, spin, smooth, edge slide. So this does allow us to move it, and we'll get in here and we'll play with these a little bit to begin to work with those tools. But those tools are all there, which now allows us to go in and begin to work with what we have for our individual objects. So we're just gonna go ahead and we're gonna start here with our basic cube. So this is what we started with. So it's the same thing if I went up here, if you were messing around with stuff and things don't look right, we can go ahead and just say new, click don't save. It'll take us back to where we initially started, giving us our layout tab. We'll just jump over here to modeling, and we're gonna make sure we're actually in edit mode. Now on the top, when we start to work with ones that allow us to begin to move things, remember these are the different things that are telling us what are we selecting when we go in there and begin to work. One on the left is a vertex select. With the vertex select, that means that we're going to select one individual vertex. If we select multiple, then we have selected our vertices. Can we select multiples? Yes. So if we go and have this set, and I come in here and I click on one vertex, and then I hit G, which is my shortcut to grab. That allows us to go ahead and begin to stretch that out. If we want that to move a certain direction, if I hit Y, it's going to follow the Y. You'll see the little pin go right straight through it. Allow me to go either direction. If I were to hit X, then we're going to control that point down the X. And if I hit Z, it'll allow us to control that on the Z axis. Once we move that, if we hit return, we'll then see what we've gone in and created with that. So see what it does. That automatically adjusts that face accordingly. So it comes over and comes up. You will notice that there is not a control point right now that goes between the two of these. As we begin to work with meshes, if we have individual points that we want to add in an edge to that. So in this case, we pulled that point up. If I want to put an edge to that so I have different control things, if you select two individual vertices, you can hit J. That's the shortcut just to join. Know that as you go in and you begin to work with those and you start to make these shapes, you want to have these additional points on there. If we are working with a mesh, if the meshes are combined, remember we went through and we added a mesh in edit mode. I said they'd be together. You can join vertices that are in different objects if they're in the same mesh. If they are two entirely separate objects because we added them in our object mode, then you cannot join things to them. So if you kind of think of, if you build one tower and it's separate, you build another tower, you want to create a walkway between them and you have points, you would have to actually take and join those meshes to one another before you could do that. Does that make sense? Okay. So that allows us to go in and place that. What would end up happening with that is now that we have that in there, right now I could select each of these vertices and it would allow me to go in and move that. See as I grab a hold of that then, just like it can with the others. But if we're going to go through and start to work with an edge, we will want to come up here to our edge select. And then that allows us, when we click on an edge, you'll see that it will highlight the edge. And then if I grab a hold of it, it's going to do the same thing as it did when I grabbed the two vertices. But in this case, now it allows us to modify it by grabbing a hold of that edge. And then I can hit return, and you'll see we have something new that's created here as well. The last thing to do to select is to come in here and select a face. Or as I said, some people may say, well, select the polygon. Well, in this case, if you click on it, you'll see it highlights the entire area. You'll see the highlighting of the line going around the outside of it. So that whole edge loop, that is part of it. We'll also highlight, and once again, if we hit G, then it allows us to go through and begin to move that. Once you're happy, you can go ahead and hit return, and it will commit what it is that you have. Now, one nice thing inside of Blender is we do have the ability to undo. So if you see here, I can keep undoing, and eventually we'll get back to my cube. So there's my cube. So that's allowing us to go in and select individual areas. So an individual vertex up to multiple vertices. We can go through and we can start to select an edge. Or we can go in and select ourselves a face. We talked about the 3D cursor. Now, the challenge that we go through to work with the 3D cursor is remember that this is working in a three-dimensional space. So when I click on that, where is that in relation on the sides? Well, depending on where we're at, so if we go through, we start to look at our different views, we can begin to see what's happening with this. So we have a point there. If I go ahead and do a split on this, what we can also do then is we can start to look at what different views do we have available to us. So if I click here, we can start to see the placement of that point, which means now if I go in and I add an object. So right now I am in edit mode. So with me being in edit mode, if I were to add an additional mesh, what would end up happening with it? If I want to have independent control of it, what's going to happen if I place it right now, being in edit mode? It's going to be part of the cube mesh. So right now, if I come in here and I were to simply come in and add to this, so if I add, in this case, UV sphere, it's added into here, but you'll see instead of giving me a sphere, what I have is I have a cube. You'll see everything is part of that cube. So now if I add material to it, this sphere and this cube are going to have the same materials. So if instead I take this out of my edit mode and I jump back over into my object mode, and now I come in here and add my UV sphere, what you're going to see up here inside of our scene collection now is a second object, an additional object. So that's where it's important that as you go through and you start to work with things, kind of think about it from the standpoint of you working with the snowman even. If you're going in there and you're adding buttons to it, and you add them and they're part of the actual shape of, say, the body, and you accidentally add it to the body. If you add the color of the body to be white, the buttons are going to want to be white too. So at that point, you'd have to go in and individually select the meshes to add color to them inside of there. And we'll look at what happens with your stuff because next week is designed strictly for you to work on your projects to make sure that things are working. And the following week we'll pull them up on here in class. We'll take a look at them. We can talk about what worked and what didn't work as we begin to go in, because today's really all about meshes, doing some minor adjustments to meshes. We're going to talk about extruding in that, but we'll get a little bit more into dealing with extrusions in that after we get done with the first project. Because the main thing that we can use to get through most of what we're doing for the snowman is strictly using shapes and doing nothing other than ultimately scaling objects. And then we'll talk very, very briefly about just a basic color like we did before on adding a color to objects as well. So depending on what you're going to work with and how you want to be able to work with these objects, you will want to go ahead and adjust whether or not you're working in object mode or whether you are going in and working in edit mode. So you can start to see what happens as we go through to use these objects and what happens as they start to ultimately interact with one another. So we go through and we start to look at how do we manipulate these objects. So if I have this one selected, if we jump back over into edit mode, remember tab is our shortcut to bounce between object mode and edit mode. That's the same whether you are in layout or modeling. If you're in layout, can you do all the stuff we're doing now? Yes, you can. You're just going to end up having that timeline that's across the bottom of your screen as well. So a little bit different is the way that the panels end up looking. So we go through and we have this individual object set.
I can't open Blender on my computer at all.
All right, so on yours, you're going to need to go to blender.org, and you're going to need to download 2.9. Or actually, just go into Brightspace, and I have them dropped in there. So if you go into Brightspace, if you go underneath of content, you're going to find this one here, Blender Resources. And then what you'll find is right there will be the Blender 2.93.5. You want the Mac OS one. And then go to install it. When you get to it, you're probably going to need me to punch in the administrative password just to update that one. So we go through, if we start to look at where do we want to begin to place objects, this is where you're going to ultimately have to end up with multiple views. And depending on how you want to work, there's a lot of different ways that we can go in. What does it give me? So we can start to look at how are we going through and looking at what views are available to us. So in this case, we may have a right. This is our front. And if I come down here to this lower one, I may want to go ahead and jump around to a top view. Because what we can end up doing then is, as we're in these different areas, this allows us to move it around. As we start to move objects, depending on what it is that you're trying to do, depending on how you're trying to align things, you then are going to need to go into adjust this. This is really a workspace type setup. But with this, remember when we start to look at our colors, knowing that green is what? What axis is green? Y-axis. So if we go in and choose that for this, I'm looking down there in the lower right corner, and I'm going to adjust this so that the center of this sphere sits on that corner. So if I do that, I can move it there, I hit return. Now if we look at the other ones, we can see where it's at. Now if I go ahead and hit scale, I can scale this down. So all I'm doing is I'm placing one on that corner. So we have one object that is on there. So now if we want to go ahead and we want to place one on the other one, depending on where we can click around, we can start to look at our different points. And what do we have? We have the 3D cursor. Remember, that's what this is here. It's our 3D cursor. It's located there. We can see where it's at there. And we can see here because this is that front view. So we know we're going to put it on this back corner. So if I go ahead, once again, I decide I want to add myself another UV sphere, it's going to go back there. Once again, I can go ahead, I can scale that down. So I'm going to work with them a little bit different sizes, just kind of working with the tools that are here. So now we can see, based upon our view, the one in front and the one that's currently selected. Now, I went through and I added this in edit mode. So that's why up here we only see one sphere setup. Can I still edit these points? Yes, I can still select all of the individual vertices. I can go and I can select individual faces. I can select individual edges if I want that as well. So this is important as we go through and we start to look at it. Remember, to place that 3D cursor, we have to just have this selected up here in the upper left. So this does allow us to place things precisely in here. And as you look at your screen, you'll see each of the areas. So now if I wanted something else there, I'm going to add a cube at that corner. So we can see where that cube ends up at. I can scale that down. So now I have a cube sitting on that corner. So now if we go and we start to rotate this around, you can see here's what's going on with it. Last but not least, I can come over to this other corner. Again, we look at our different points. And you will notice that when you place it, so if you start wondering why you're seeing extra lines, know that when you place that 3D cursor, it is going to give you all those same lines. Essentially gives you an X, a Y, and a Z line on it, indicating placement of it. So then with that set, I can go ahead and I can add myself another thing just for fun. Let's go ahead and put an icosphere on that corner. And we use S to scale that. So as I mentioned, when I went through and I was placing all those objects, I did leave them set. So you'll see they all relate to that sphere. So at that point, if though it's not just a sphere anymore, we'll just call them corner things. So it's going to let me know what it is that we're working with on those. Now, if I come in here, do I want to select things? Yes, I can select an individual vertex. So know that as you go in and build those, we can go in here, and if I choose face, I can select individual faces or multiple faces, and we can go in and we can modify what is there. Now, if we build some things and we decide that we want to go ahead and get rid of them, we can come in here, we can separate, and you'll see separate by selection. So if you're going and you're creating something, you have these pieces to it, and you want to break these pieces apart, that is the way in which we could do that. So you'll see now I went ahead and created this. So now if I hit take and have that selected, and I go in here to move it, you'll see, oops. You'll see if I go in here and start to work this here that I have available to me, it's allowed me to select behind there. This object is broken up from the other one. So there it goes. So you'll see there, I can take that piece right off of there. There it goes. So now you can see, as we look into there, you can see where that corner is going into that object that was there, that sphere. So you aren't stuck with them. You can still manipulate them. It's just important that when you go through and start to work with different things, if you want to be able to make each one of these become a different color material-wise, then as we go through and we make our selections, it's much easier, at least for me, to go in and work with those as entirely different objects by placing them as objects versus an edit mode, so therefore the meshes don't go through and combine. I'm just going to do a new file because it'll be a lot faster than trying to reset everything back. So new file, we're going to jump in here to modeling. So it's going through and making the selections, but how do we go about making additional vertices, different loops and that? Well, the easy way to come down here and start to work is we can come down here and go to loop cut. Now the shortcut to get to loop cut and slide is Command R. So we have our object out here. So if I hit Command R, you'll see that we get this line that shows up out here. What it's first going to show you is you're going to see, are we actually cutting it vertically or horizontally? And that's a decision you need to make. And in doing so, which way is it going around it? You'll see if you hover over top of it, you're going to see that line. That's just going to indicate where the cut's going to be at. So in this case, if I go ahead and put it there and I click, you're now going to get that it goes through and starts to give me this slide. Now by default, when you first click, it's going to go in and divide up whatever you have for that shape or that mesh. It's going to divide it in half. So right now when I clicked, it automatically put it in the middle. If I just go ahead and hit return, it's going to leave it directly in the middle. So there I have that. If I wanted to do another one and I come up here and I choose the same side, once I hit return, again, it's in the middle, I hit return again, it's going to stay there. So we can keep doing this. And we can divide this up. Didn't mean to move that one. Close enough. And one last one. So now what we have is we've gone through and we've divided our cube up. So now we have all of these different points. Now what's one thing we have to be aware of as we go in and we start working inside of here? Can we just jump in here and without really thinking about what it is we're creating, just go in here and start throwing down lines? No, we want to have an idea as to what is that we're going here to model. That's why when we go through, it's still important that we start thinking about sketching things out and what are things ultimately going to look like, what is our goal in the end. It's because when we go in and we create something in here, if I now come in here and work to grab a vertex and I go to move that, we're going to start to see what's happening to those other areas. So as I go in, I can go in and grab that one by one, and I can bring that up to that point. The other thing I can also do is we can go in here, we can select multiples. So if I select all of these and hit G to grab, it's going to start to move them. Well, if I hit Z, it's going to take them all straight up. So if I go like this, and then simply hit return, now look what we have. We've gone and we've created these points that are coming up off of that top edge. Now what happens if we want to bring an area out? So if we want to take this area and bring this area out, well, there's a few ways that we can work with that. If I were to come in here and select these as faces, could I select all these faces? Yes. Now if I hit G to grab those, we'll see that we're going to get a little bit different appearance on that. So now as I pull that out, you'll notice that it takes this edge that's there and it just stretches that out to connect to that object. Now if we want to bring this out and work with it flat, so right now all we're doing is we're still selecting and we're translating, or we're grabbing those and we're pulling them into a specific direction. Well, what we can also do then, if we want to bring an area out, so we have these four faces and we want to actually bring them out, but we don't want it to look like this. See how we get that slope coming on there? What we can also do then with that is we have this ability to extrude. So if you come over here, we're going to see our extrude region. Shortcut for that is E. If I hit E and I start to move it, now notice what it's going to do. It does two things. We can either push it in through, and you'll see I can take it all the way over and out the other side. But typically we're going to use that to grab a hold of an area and pull this area out. But notice that it's flat. So now what we have is we have this ability to go in and bring out this object. So that's just dealing with extruding. If we come in here to a couple areas, another thing that we can also do if we select one individual area or even two areas, we have this ability to inset faces. The shortcut for inset faces is I. So what happens when we hit I? Well, you'll see here that it's going to go in, and we have two of them selected. So you're going to see how it goes in and begins to adjust the object. Now where they touch, it's going to remain a line. So that's our edge. So you'll see here if we do that. Now what happens with that is notice how those go in. So what we can also do is we can grab a hold of these, and then what happens if I hit E for extrude? Well, now you can see how we can go and push that area in. If we were to grab this side, same thing if I were to hit I on this one. I can inset this face. Hit return. Now all of these are faces. So they do work the same on a face select. They also work the same if we come in here and do an edge select. So if I grab a hold of that edge and I want to translate where that edge is at. So I'm going to bring it over here based on that. So now all of a sudden we've gone in and we've moved that to point down. If I wanted to adjust this, yes, I could grab a hold of this now, extrude, and go ahead and push that in just a little bit. Then I can come over to this other side and work the same way. We'll deal with modifiers later on, but there is an actual thing that's called a mirror modifier, which does allow us to go in and create symmetrical objects by only having to manipulate one side of it. So with the selector, once again, if I grab a hold of the eye, I'm going to go ahead and bring this in a little bit. Edge select. G, we're going to bring that down, again, constraining it to the X. Select our face, which is that there. And I'm just going to go ahead and extrude and push that in just a little bit. So now we see that we have essentially these insets. What I have here is the beginnings of maybe a dragon. I don't know what he's going to become. I don't know if I can get this to do. Nope, not gonna work on that one. So if you're working with a shape, and I just went ahead and dropped a new cube in here to show you what's happening with the bevel. So when we go through and we select that, what you're going to see is you get this little handle that shows up. Kind of looks like a lollipop sticking out of it. And this is going to allow us to go in here and begin to work with a shape. Now I created a bevel. Now notice that since I had created a bevel, when I come in here and I select it, it's going to attempt to bevel, in this case, all of the edges that I went in and had selected. So if I undo this and go back to where you see it, here it is as a cube. So now when I work with this, it's going to allow me to go in and create a bevel. If I drop that and I go in to create a bevel again, you'll see how it goes in and adjusts on the other. If you drop it again, it's going to keep doing this until you eventually get to the point where you can't do much without it getting all messed up. But there's kind of a look that I got by adding that. So just know that if you add the bevel in, once you add the bevel to it, essentially what it does is it goes through and manipulates the entire mesh. So the mesh is no longer the mesh that it was prior to you adding the bevel. So you're not just simply adjusting the bevel, you're going to be adding in a new bevel to it. Drop another cube. Here, jump back over into edit. We went through, like I said, our loop cut and slide, and then we have our knife. Which allows us to begin to cut up an object. So what we have when we go through and we start to work with that is it gives us additional then edges that we can go through and we can select and we can manipulate. So just like anything else, we can grab these and we can begin to move these around. This does allow us to go in and ultimately, as we go through on a certain face, maybe we're not going in to create something specific in the sense, I shouldn't say, something that is consistent, symmetrical. We're actually just going in to cut something to be able to make a minor movement to an object. That's where we'll go in and use our knife. As I mentioned, we did select multiple vertices in here. We can go through and we can start to look at creating specific objects or manipulating individual objects. Let's go ahead and jump over here to object. Let me add in a cube, and then we're gonna go ahead and start to build something out of this. So you may have heard or understand or not understand when we start getting into this why they start talking about things as box modeling. Well, what we have here is we have our individual object. And with this object, don't want negative, I want 1. So with our object, if we want to go in and start to build something out, like what are we going to make out of this? Can we go in, let's do a simple little like house type design from something like this. So as we go through to work with that, this is a situation where, remember, when we go through, 1's going to give us our front, 3's going to give us our right, 7's going to give us our top. This is going to allow us to go in and begin to cut up this object or manipulate what we have for our object. So as you come in here to build it, so if we say we want to bring out, part of this, well, what we can go through and do is just jump into our tab, and let's go ahead and jump in our loop, cut, and slide. And I know that I want to have a part here. It's going to take this up just a little bit higher. Let's go something like that. So I have this object on there. So as I go through and work, I want to bring out just this one side. Well, if I go ahead and do a face select on this, I can extrude and I can bring this out here. And that's on the x-axis. So I'm just going to go ahead and give myself something that looks about like that. So I have that set. Across the top. Now this is one of those situations where as we go in here and we start to work with this, that we want to have something come across here so we can start to deal with the peaks. Well, if I grab my loop, cut, and slide, notice it does go across both objects, or both areas, I should say. So I'm going to do that, hit return. So if I look at my top view of this, we have our line on there. Well, if I want to go ahead and manipulate that, we can go ahead and we can select both of those lines, and if I hit G, I start to bring these up, or I can constrain it to a Z-axis, so they're going to have the exact same pitch to them. So you'll see here, we've gone in, we've built and drug those out. Now if you want to do anything else across here, remember we do have 2 points over here. They are in part of a mesh. If I wanted a line across there, if I hit loop, cut, and slide, what you're going to see with this is that we end up with what's going to go from the top to the bottom, and whatever that midline is, it automatically calculates out what that shape would look like as we move it down. Well, we don't want that, because what we're talking about is putting a line across there. So what would we go through to use to do that? We can select each of these points, and then we can hit J, which allows us to join. So then if we wanted to do anything else to this area, we could. So if I wanted to come in here and select these spots and not have this come out, I could once again extrude this out to give me an additional area over this. If we want to come in here and have an inset for like a door, in this case, I could go ahead and I could look at doing a loop cut. That's going to come along this edge. You'll see it's going to go all the way around it. So know that when you go in to make these cuts, that is what's going to happen as we go in to divide that up based upon those individual points. So we can go through and we can create that. How many lines you end up having is going to come down to what you decide to have with it. Is there another way that we can go ahead and create those lines on here? Well, what if we came in here with a knife? Could we come in here and do that? Yes, I could theoretically come in here. So the challenge, of course, with that is where is it snapping to? So we can see our individual lines that are here. Well, as we go through and build these, remember these are shapes. They also have a vertex to them. So this kind of got a little off in where it ended up being at on here. Plus you'll see then down there, it's working off of that corner point. So in this case, once I have certain areas set, I could come in here on this. I could also do an inset face. Oh, come on. I'm just going to do one this way. This is not to scale. Just a little doorway here to go in. Now as we add those, you'll see they do go all the way around. So as we start to work with individual parts of the mesh, just know that you're going to have additional lines possibly showing up on there. Now if I came around here to the front, it's a little hard with all the other stuff in there. So this is that. These are the other meshes that are back behind there. So I'm going to go ahead and look to add in, some, let's go to windows. And the main goal of what we're doing here is just getting used to what your tools are, how you work with them. Put a ready for a front door on here too. All right, so as we go through and we start to look at areas, we start to divide areas up. The other thing with it, remember that we can go ahead and we can select individual areas, and then we can ultimately come in and delete. So in this case, we can delete a face. And if you look just right at this, you're going to be able to see that when I deleted that face that was right there, we can see through it. So you can see how you're seeing into the actual object that we've gone in and built. So you can delete stuff to see into things. If I came in here for this door here, we can go ahead and if we just put an inset, something like that. If I wanted to have an area that came out, I could do something along those lines. Grab a hold of this face in here, extrude it out. Should be the y-axis. We could extrude this out. So now we have that area coming out. And then I could even take this, extrude this out. And we can continue to add to this. So this allows us to, like I said, continue to work in what started out as a cube. We can add additional faces to them and allow them to turn into whatever it is we can conceive up. That's just using, again, the basic tools that are inside of it. This isn't entity meshes. This isn't dealing with modifiers, nothing like that. So if we look at what objects we have inside of here, we can see how this all goes through. And like I said, this is all just a cube. We start to look at these other objects that we have over here. You know, what happen with that. It's the same thing. We're still dealing with a cube. There's our other cube. Same thing with this one. So as we start to think about these and start to work with objects, once we have our object selected, then we'll jump into our edit mode, which will allow us to go in and be able to grab a hold of different areas. Now with our material, all these will ultimately be assigned a base material. So if we were to go through and look at these as viewport shading, or even if we jump into rendered, you know what it's going to look like when we go through and render them out. I don't know where this camera is set up at the moment. Oh, we can't see that, guys. So if we were to come in here to this and actually render this, we'll see here we have the colors, in this case, still set just to white. But we can go ahead and we can select these different areas and we can give them a base color. Now all of these are assigned right now a single material. So right now we have this material, it's assigned to there. If I go ahead and I create a new material, and I change this color to blue, I can grab a hold of different areas. I can select that blue material and I can assign it, and you'll see now it shows up onto there. You have to create a new material. Now this isn't about getting into materials. This is all about basic coloring of different objects. Now if I were to jump out of here and go to a new object, so in this case I jump over here to the one where we dealt with our bevel. If I do that and I jump back into my edit mode, you'll notice there are not any materials inside of here yet. So in this case I would have to add a material, click on new, give me a new color. You'll see it takes the whole object on there. If I wanted something to be a different color, so again, I select that, I come over here and I add a material, new, change it to yellow, and then with those objects selected, they're still going to be the old color that was there. I just simply need to go ahead and say assign. Now if we go ahead and we take this and we render it, remember it's going to render back to the camera, you can now see those different colors showing up. So that's just how we apply a basic color to it. Remember, that's just our base color that is inside of there. Now as you go and you start to work with and create your snowman, they're not designed to be super difficult. So I'm just going to create a new one. You can say bye to all my stuff here because I'm not going to save any of it. So when we go in here and we start to work with our snowman. So if I went in and really simple, I'm just going to come in here and add a UV sphere. If I were to scale that one up, turn, let's go ahead and we're going to add ourselves another one. So let's just go ahead and come in here. I'm still in object mode. It's going to make sure, in this case, I'm going to bring my pieces in that I'm going to start with. If I stay in object mode, then we know that we're not going to end up putting them into the same area. So we'll see all of our spheres and stuff over there. We can actually name them. So if I had another UV sphere in, we'll see we have that. I can bring that up. I can scale that up. Now whether you think snowmen should have 3 parts for the body or 2 parts for the body, it's completely up to you. So once again, our add menu, remember shift add is your shortcut to go ahead and bring up your add menu. So we'll do that. I'm going to grab that. I'm going to translate that up using my Z-axis and hit return. So now if I look at this from the front, I can see where these are at. I can select these and I can manipulate and move them around anywhere that I want them. If you're happy with them in that location, that's fine. So there gives me my little snowman. I like working from the front view. It just allows me to see better where certain things are at. And now with it, I'm going to get out my 3 buttons. So we see up here we have sphere. That's the bottom. So we could actually start to name these if we want to. Bottom, middle, top. Actually, we'll go like this. Head. So it allows us to come in and work with that. So there we have him set like that. Actually, I'm going to jump to my top view real quick because we know he's got to have a hat. That's one of the things that we want to go in and work with. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and we're going to add in. So what we have here is we have mesh, but we're going to come down here to our cylinder. We're going to click on that. And what's going to happen is going to place it right where that is at. If I jump around here to the front view, we're going to see that this is down low. So there's our cylinder that we just got. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that up here. I'm going to scale that down. Now once we go in and we scale that down to get the right diameter, what we can also do with that, if we want it taller, we can make it taller. If we're happy with what we have there, then we can simply go ahead and bring this down here closer to what we have for the top of the head, or the top of the hat that's there. So once again, I've left my 3D cursor right in the middle because I know that's going to be set right at that baseline. So once again, I can just add in another, in this case, cylinder. And we go ahead and grab that, move that up here towards the top. Kind of set it right where the head's going to be. Well, then what we can do with this is we can go ahead and we can adjust the scale of this. So once again, if I hit scale and I just do Z, it's going to allow me to squash this down. We get happy with the size of it. We can go ahead and translate it once again on the Z axis, bring it down here. See it's interacting with the head. And once again, grab this one. And then we want to move it, Z axis, bring it down until it's interacting with that. So now what we have so far is we've gone in and we've quickly assigned then these objects to it. So we still have two cylinders up here. On those cylinders, if you wanted them to actually interact as one, we could have actually gone through and made them into the same mesh. So you can see we can quickly go in and keep adding stuff. Yes, you can add additional spheres to go in and start to make the buttons or for the chest. Arms. Easy way to make the arms is to, once again, just work with a cylinder. So I go ahead and bring those out. I can scale that down. I can scale it just on the Z. Once again, we can scale them down smaller if we want to. Rotate them. Bring it over. Oops. Bring it up. Then what we're going to see is now we're starting to get, in this case, an arm on there. So we can add additional arms on there, or things on there to look more like fingers to it. We can go ahead and we can take that object and we can duplicate it. So this allows us to duplicate objects. So Shift D, so now there's another one. Which if I just bring it over this way and rotate it on the Y-axis. Should have fixed my view before I did that, but it's still there. So it allows us to go in and just where exactly is that going to be at with it. So there it starts to have some arms. So you can see that we can quickly go in and begin to work with objects. Then what we can do is we can come in here and go ahead and add color to these. So new in this case, I'm just going to leave that to white. Same thing on this one, new. It should default base color to go into white. I go ahead and select the arm, again new, change this to something like a red, brown, maroonish look to it. So you can, like I said, with this, it doesn't matter what exactly you end up having it look like. I just want you to make a snowman. It can have one body part if it's just a large, goofy looking one. 3 pieces, 2 pieces. Give it some sort of a hat. Like I said, you can say basic, going in and dealing with just like a top hat style. Or you can go with something that's a little bit more elaborate. Just think about what you're putting in there. This is really now designed about, unlike the first in-class thing that was just creating a mesh so you can actually get them in there and know what they were. At this point, I want you to start to think about how you're going to go about assembling the pieces, getting them in there. This will really get you to have to select stuff. And then I want you just to put base colors on the different parts. So when we look at the rendering, it is there. Next week, what we're going to really get into is working on this and making sure everything is working the way that you want it to, problems that you ran into. And then we'll take a look at all of these in class on the 29th for what everybody uploads into here. And then we'll talk about talk about what's going to go on when we get to project number 2, which is really going to start to build a little bit more into adding things into it. We'll talk more about modifiers at this point. So we'll get into dealing a bit more. If you've looked at the syllabus, you can see we're a little bit ahead of where I anticipated us being, since we've already talked about extrusions, loop cuts, bevels, and knife. So when we'll get into dealing a little bit more with shading, going in and adding a bit more with color to it. We'll start looking at texturing things. How do we go in and UV wrap and unwrap things? But the big thing, like, just get used to it. Start working with it. Remember that when you go through and do the render is based upon where the camera's pointing. So if you're not seeing what you want to see, remember this is your camera. So with that, make sure that you go ahead and adjust where exactly your camera is pointing to. This will be a really good experience for you. While it is a basic project, as I work with in all of my classes, your first project is what I always talk about, is get your feet wet projects, get you used to working inside of here and actually creating something that you can conceptualize inside of your own mind.